322 comments on a farewell post, not for a franchise cornerstone, not for a player who had given Indiana a decade of her career, for a player who barely logged meaningful minutes, and who, every single time she did step on that floor, delivered exactly what a contender needs from its depth. The Indiana Fever fan base did not respond with anger. They responded with something heavier than that. They responded with exhaustion. The specific kind of exhaustion that builds when you watch an organization repeat the same category of mistake year after year, while the vocabulary changes and the results stay the same. And this time, the stakes are categorically different from anything this franchise has ever faced before. Because this time, Caitlin Clark is inside that building. And what gets built around her matters in ways that cannot be overstated. What unfolded in Indiana during a single 24-hour window is not a minor roster footnote buried in a long season. It is a moment that made the philosophy underneath this organization's decision-making visible for everyone paying attention. Kennedy Carter, released. Jazmine Preciado, released. Both of them landing in Las Vegas, where a franchise that operates with championship intentions immediately recognized what Indiana apparently could not. And the player whose roster spot was never in any danger, regardless of what any metric produced, remained in the rotation while the coaching staff discussed culture, and the wins continued arriving at a rate that does not reflect what this group should be capable of. That is not an accident. That is an organizational direction. And those 322 people flooding that farewell post are telling you, with complete clarity, exactly what they think that direction leads to. Start with Kennedy Carter, because her arc this season tells one of the stranger roster stories in the league. Earlier this year, she was averaging 15 points per game in roughly 20 minutes of playing time. 15 points in 20 minutes is not a depth player carrying her weight. That is a bench contributor making a front office look smart, making a coaching staff look competent for deploying her correctly, and making a fan base feel like the depth behind their stars is real rather than a cardboard construction. Then something shifted. She stopped playing. The organization offered no meaningful explanation publicly. What the fan base knows is the sequence. She was producing at an elite per minute rate, then she disappeared, and then she was gone. Not dealt for value, just gone. Released, with Indiana receiving nothing in return, and Las Vegas receiving a player who had been one of the more efficient scorers in the league relative to her role. Jazmine Preciado's situation is in some ways even harder to rationalize through any basketball framework. In under 17 minutes per night, she was averaging 12 points per game on 60% shooting from the field and over 50% from beyond the arc. These are not the numbers of a player still proving herself. These are the numbers of a player who has already proven herself every time she gets a chance to play. And when your offensive engine is a creative, high-vision playmaking guard who draws defensive attention the way Caitlin Clark does, a shooter converting at that kind of rate is not a luxury. She is a necessity. She is exactly what you build your spacing around. Indiana waived her. The Aces picked her up immediately because franchises that understand winning basketball recognize value when a competitor decides to discard it. Then there is the contrast the fan base keeps returning to, because it is the most visible data point about what the actual decision-making framework looks like in Indiana right now. The player who held her rotation spot throughout all of this is shooting at the worst rate of her career. The defensive numbers around her performance are not a matter of interpretation. Multiple people who watch this team closely and pull the actual statistics have described her defensive contributions as among the worst of any player receiving consistent rotation minutes in the league. She was measurably more productive the previous season under a different coaching staff. Something changed when the roster and coaching structure changed, and the change did not benefit her. Her production declined across every category that matters, and yet her spot was protected in a way that Carter and Preciado's spots were not, despite both of them outperforming her in their respective roles. Nobody from the Indiana organization has offered a basketball explanation for that specific contrast. The coaching staff talks about culture. They talk about fit. They talk about veterans establishing the standard. But none of that language, no matter how many times it circulates through press availability, explains why a player shooting over 50% from three cannot break into a rotation that clearly needs what she provides. If you are watching this unfold and asking the same questions the fan base is asking, you are in the right place. Subscribe to WNBA updates and hit the bell, because we are tracking every decision, every rotation choice, and every story this league is generating, and we are not going to pretend the numbers say something they do not. Now consider where both of those released players landed. The Las Vegas Aces, an ownership group that has demonstrated, repeatedly and in the highest pressure environments professional sports produces, that losing is not something they build their organizations around. Becky Hammon is the head coach, a basketball mind whose reputation inside the league was strong enough that multiple NBA franchises examined her seriously for head coaching positions during her time as one of the top assistants under Greg Popovich. That is the organization that now has both Preciado and Carter. That is the competitive environment they are walking into. Indiana, meanwhile, enters the next stretch of games thinner at guard than they were before, with a coaching staff still speaking in cultural abstractions, and a fan base that has moved well past frustrated into genuinely alarmed. Alarmed not about this season's win total. Alarmed about whether the organization surrounding Caitlin Clark is actually equipped to honor what she represents, maximize what she can do, and construct something around her that is genuinely worthy of the talent they were handed when she arrived. Because here is the simple version of what just happened. The Aces got better. Indiana got thinner. Two players who could shoot, space the floor, and give Clark the kind of complementary support a franchise centerpiece deserves are now both wearing different uniforms and playing in a system built around winning. The player whose metrics justify none of her roster security is still in the rotation. And the language coming out of Indiana's coaching staff, still, has not connected those specific dots in any way the fan base finds credible. The comment that should genuinely unsettle Indiana's front office is not the pointed one. It is not the statistical breakdown posted by a frustrated supporter who pulled the numbers. It is the simple one. The fan who wrote, in a farewell comment directed at a player who barely got to play, "Get out before they take that from you too." That is not a troll comment. That is the voice of a fan base that has watched this franchise operate below its potential for years, that absorbed disappointing season after disappointing season, that endured roster decisions that made no sense and coaching philosophies that went nowhere, and that finally had a reason to believe something had genuinely changed. They had Caitlin Clark. And now they are watching the organization make personnel decisions that feel identical in structure and outcome to every mistake that came before. Except this time, the cost of those decisions is not another forgettable season. It is the potential misuse of a generational talent's prime years. Clark's prime does not pause while Indiana works through whatever its actual organizational philosophy is. It is happening now. The games Indiana just lost to the Sparks, dropping that road contest 106-92, and the upcoming matchup against Las Vegas on Monday, which now includes players Indiana gave away for nothing, are not abstract future consequences. They are the consequences landing in real time. The honest question this situation forces into the open has two possible answers, and neither is comfortable to sit with. Is what is happening in Indiana the result of a front office and coaching staff that genuinely cannot see what they are doing clearly enough to understand the damage? Or is the culture Stephanie White keeps describing a philosophy that is simply not oriented around maximizing what Caitlin Clark can do? Incompetence is correctable. You change the structure, you install a clearer competitive framework, you rebuild. The other answer requires a different conclusion entirely, and the fan base's most pointed comments are already gesturing toward it. 322 comments on a post for a player who barely saw the court. The fan base already understands what this is. The only remaining question is whether the people making decisions inside that building understand it too, and whether they move before the window that cannot be reopened closes on its own. That's the full breakdown. If this is the kind of analysis you want every time something significant moves in the WNBA, no fluff, no spin, just the real story, subscribe to WNBA updates right now. Drop your take in the comments below. Do you think Indiana corrects course, or is the damage already done? Let's talk.